All right, my friends. I'm just checking to make sure everything's working here. Make sure I'm not just talking to myself and all that. Looked like my internet wasn't right, so counting on somebody to jump in here and let me know. And we're gonna rock on down the road. So anyway, hope things are going well for you. It's Tuesday, and man, these days I am up early and out late, and so I'm kind of burning the candle at both ends, trying to do a lot of work, get some things accomplished for us in so many different ways. And so, anyway, it's the byproduct of growing ministry, I guess, is a lot of that. So that's where we are. Anyway, this morning I'm excited to kind of get back in deal to all of it. Thanks, Barry. Get back in line with where we are in the concept of divorce. And so this is our topic. And I want to do it in 3 weeks. 3 days, because I think there's some things. This is an issue that touches almost every family, and so I think it's important that we grab real concrete truth of what God says, not man's opinion, not our assumptions, not what we want something to say, but what it actually says about divorce and remarriage and all of those things. And so breathe. If you're in one of those situations, there's a gracious God, but it's important that we understand the truth as it relates to what pleases Him from our vantage point. And so that's true of all Christ followers. So today we're gonna hit review. Now listen, if you didn't hear yesterday, I'm not saying don't listen right now, but make sure you go back and look at yesterday, because we're covering a section that we're taking a couple of days to get to, and then I really want to take you to 1 Corinthians tomorrow. So enough of that. Let's just remind ourselves several things of what we looked at yesterday as we go into this subject. So yesterday we looked at Malachi chapter 2 verse 16, and God there says, "I hate divorce." That's an important concept for us to understand. God's not a fan of divorce. Okay, so let's at least acknowledge that. The scripture teaches that. Malachi addresses that. Now he's addressing, so you understand the context, priests and people had begun to leave their Jewish wives in favor of these new women in the land in which they find themselves. And that's an affront to a holy God. And that's what God speaks about. And He says, you're divorcing these wives to marry these. I hate divorce. And so that's the context behind what He says there. Now, then we come to this, and Jesus is asked this question down in Judea. They ask Him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Now, Matthew adds a little phrase, is it lawful to divorce your wife for any reason? So that really lets us know what the context is, because in that day, Malachi was a forerunner for really opening the gate, and then divorce was kind of rampant, which it is here in Jesus' day, which it is here in our day. And so that you had different schools that taught different things. One of the rabbis that the Pharisees followed was a man named Hillel, and basically he said you could be divorced for any reason. And so that's what they're asking. Now, the reason why they're asking, and before we jump into divorce, is because if he says no, then they believe that that's going to turn the crowd against him, because so many of them have found themselves in this divorce situation. And then they're gonna want to get rid of him. In fact, potentially, maybe they'll help kill him, because that's what happened with John the Baptist when he took a harder line on divorce and remarriage with Herod, who then had him killed. So that's the context there. Now let's look at what he says. He says, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Jesus goes right to the scriptures, which is the way all of us should do this. And so he says, what did Moses command you? They said Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. So that's what they say. Now, again, Matthew adds that, where am I? They said Moses permits a man to a certificate of divorce and sends her away. Matthew says that they say the phrase command. He commands them to divorce. So here's the rub. We're just saying, what did God command? And so before we get to that, because we're going to go to that passage in just a second, let me remind you of the 4 principles that we looked at yesterday of marriage. And he speaks of this in verse 6. But at the beginning, I don't want to be going too fast. I'm just trying to get things together. Let's just review yesterday. But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So what's the first point we learned? Marriage is between one man, one woman. That's it. Not one man and several women, not one man and one man, not one woman and one woman, one man, one woman. That's marriage. That's what God defines it as. That's what Jesus defines it as. Then he says this, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That word united there is a stronger word than it is there. The New American Standard, I think, says cling. The King James says cleave. The word is permabond. It's like we have this product called a chemi at work, and so when 2 pieces of limestone are broken, if I use this 2-part mixture and bond them back together, the bond is so strong. If I were to drop that stone, that area right there won't break. Other things will, but that won't break. This is kind of the concept of what they're talking about here. Marriage is a permabond. It's a clinging together. I leave my own family to start my own, and now I have permabonded myself to my wife. That's why some people do that sand ceremony, because once you mix that sand, you can't unmix it, right? It's all intertwined together. That's the concept here. And then he says, for this reason, a man will, and the two will become one flesh, right? So in marriage, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 1. Right? We become one in spirit. We become one in mind and body and heart and soul. And so there's this concept, and these are the principles of marriage. It's a one fleshness. And then the final thing is he says marriage is an act of God. So they're no longer 2, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, nobody should separate. In other words, you don't have the right to dissolve what God ordained, what God created. And so that's the concept. Now, the trouble in marriage, then, is the fall. And we looked at that yesterday, right? That part of the curse would be that the woman would want to dominate over her husband. Slyly, slickly, however it is, at the core of a woman without the Holy Spirit dictating and ruling her life, she's going to have an inclination to want to dominate. The man, given rule over his wife at that curse, will want to do so not in a loving, providing, caring way. Therein is the strife in marriage, and you already know about that if you're married. Now, having said that, let's go back to this thing that he says there. Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. All right, that's found in Deuteronomy 24. I'm going to turn there. I'm going to read it. And I want you to understand exactly what is going on. In chapter 24 of Deuteronomy, it says, if a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him. Now, that's the word that they use to say, well, that means anything, right? So in some of your versions, it's going to say an indecency. If he finds an indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her house, and sends her from his house. So here's what they're saying. A man in that time could have found some indecency in his wife. Well, what does that mean exactly? That's what the Pharisees are trying to get Jesus to say. It means anything. And he's not. What it means is that there's something shameful that she has done, something disrespectful that she has done, and so they take that. That's how they would have understood that word. They're going to take that and go, well, she burnt the toast. That's just shameful. How can a woman, right? And so they're going to do that kind of a thing. But really, in this mind, there's no command to divorce because of those things. He's saying if a man does this, that's not the command. I just want us to be clear on that. There's no command to divorce anywhere. Matthew 19:17 kind of makes that plain. But let's go on in this context. It says, so he gives her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. So she's gone because she did some shameful. It could have been that she was just a flirtatious woman. There could be some things like that where you go, hey, that's kind of serious stuff, right? It doesn't broach the issue of adultery. Like this wasn't an immoral, sexual thing. Shameful doesn't go to that degree, but it is this, disrespect. Maybe she was disrespecting in the community, whatever it was. after she leaves his house, she becomes the wife of another man. So she marries somebody else. And her second husband dislikes her. And that word kind of sheds some more light on it, doesn't it? Because it's kind of a similar thing. Dislikes her, like, nah, she's shameful. She's not who I thought she was. And writes her certificate of divorce, gives it to her and sends her from her house, or if he dies, then her first husband, who divorced her, is not allowed to marry her again. She has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the land of the Lord your God, as giving you as an inheritance. So what are we learning there? That there was no command to divorce. There was only a command that if you divorce a woman, make sure you're not going to have it. You're not going to go out. Yeah, I kind of like what I had. Let me go back to that. It's like kind of like a trial and error thing. Oh, I'm gonna try this wife. I'm gonna get rid of her. I'll try this one. Maybe okay. I don't like her as much. I'm gonna go back. God's going. That's not happening. We're not going to do this revolving marriage thing. This isn't the bachelorette thing. We're not doing that. And so that's the command that Moses gives us there. So now back to the concept of adultery in Mark 10. So after that conversation, then it says this in verse 10. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. So the disciples are going, what did he just say? And it says, he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. He doesn't give any clause there, right? Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. Now, Matthew adds the phrase in his statement. He says, if anyone divorces his wife except for adultery, he causes her to commit adultery. So here's the deal. There is an exception to divorce that is permissible, and it is adultery. It separates the bond. It is the only substance that will loosen up that bond of one fleshness. It violates it. It's destroyed it. It's made the permabond kind of fall apart. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you have to, but we'll get to that in a minute. See, because here's what happens. Leviticus 20 says that if you commit adultery, you know what happens, right? In those days, both of you were married to someone else, and you commit this. Both of you were stoned. You're gone out and killed. So, in a sense, adultery is a sense. It's like your spouse died, so you're free to remarry. There is that exception. So God allowed divorce for the hardening of the heart, right? And it's this deal. Sidebar, but that's why lust and pornography and all of those things is so destructive, because Jesus says if you lust after a woman, you've committed adultery in your heart. So that's why we have to be. I mean, you cannot engage in that pornography and lusting after people. It has to stop, because it's eroding your relationship with your mate from a God perspective and from a realistic perspective. So in Deuteronomy 7 now, and we're not going to turn there, but they are giving a rereading of the law, and he says don't marry foreign wives. When you enter into this promised land, don't you marry foreign wives. They're going to steal your heart and take you away to adultery. Now, idolatry. Now, follow me, because I want you to see some logic about how marriage works. But to do so, we need to see a relationship spiritually with God the Father and idolatry, not adultery. And so, but they did marry foreign women, Deuteronomy 7 says. And so in Ezra 10, God is telling them you've done that. And he says idolatry is worse than divorce. I want you to divorce those women and then marry and leave and they in fact agreed and said, hey, we're going to divorce our wives. We're going to abandon our children. We're going to go do what's right before God. Idolatry trumps anything of adultery in that sense. Now, why am I telling you that? Well, because in Jeremiah 3, that's the very reason why the scripture says that God divorced Israel. All right, let me read it to you. I hope this is making sense to you. If a man divorces his wife and she leaves him and marries another man, should he return to her again? Would not the land be completely defiled? But you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. Would you now return to me, declares the Lord? And so he's saying, are you going to try and come back to me? You've gone out and perverted yourself in idolatry, and you're going to come back to me? And then he says in verse 8, I gave faithless Israel her certificate of divorce and sent her away because of all her adulteries. So adultery is the legitimate reason, because God himself says that's what I did with Israel. Because Israel's immorality mattered so little to her, she defiled the land and committed adultery with stone and wood. Now, a little later on, this is the grace of God. This is what I want you to understand. He says, return, O faithless people, declares the Lord, for I am your husband. I will choose you, one from a town and two from a clan, and bring you to Zion. So what is he saying? Hey, I'm going to bring you back. My point here is that adultery doesn't have to end the marriage. See, because God's grace is shown there. For adultery became an option, not a command in that sense. To invite back, right? Joseph was going to leave Mary because of this issue of perceived adultery. Changed his mind. The woman that was brought in to Jesus, who had been caught in the act of adultery, God, in the form of Jesus, didn't extract the harsh justice of the Old Testament and say, well, I'm going to stone you. He says, I'm not condemning you. Just stop doing that activity. You see, there's the grace of God that we see from the law to the New Testament. We see where God is gracious about this. I'm telling you this because if you find that your mate or you have engaged in adultery, it doesn't mean it is the end. It doesn't mean that now I'm obligated or now I'm free. No, you can practice love and forgiveness and grace just like God has done. Stay in that marriage. Watch what God will do in that. Okay, so this. I just want to make sure we're clear on this. God hates divorce, and it's not His will, but it is an option if adultery is involved. But it doesn't have to be. The story of Hosea is all about that, right? That's where he tells Hosea to go and marry a wife, and she's not going to love you. I want you to know what it feels like as a prophet. I want you to know what it feels like to be God and want your spouse to want Israel like you want a wife, and know that they're going to go play the harlot, and they're going to deal with the idolatry. And so it's the love that won't die, and it's the picture of God for us. So at the end of the story, as Gomer, his wife, has just gone out and about, and he's tried everything to bring her back in and to keep her inside his home and to create purity. He finally finds her, and she's on the auction block, and she's being sold another time. And he bids to win her back and bring her to him. It's the most incredible love story in all of the life. But it's the way God deals with you and me. See, it's our sin. And though we are idolatrous, though we are adulterous, He still pursues us. And He will still purchase our salvation like He did with the cross and bring us back. And so it's a powerful story. But listen, so if you divorce for adultery, you're free to remarry. This is what He's saying there. But there's very little wiggle room, the disciples say. And that's what they're saying in Matthew. Hey, listen, if it's like that, it's better not even to marry. And so that's in Matthew 19. Doesn't say it in Mark, but that's what he says there. And so here's the question that we're left with today. Well, it's better just not to marry, because if this is this, so they understood it to be pretty tight and serious. You don't just get to choose, hey, I'm going to leave because I don't like them, or we don't get along, or they're mean, or they don't get me, or I've outgrown them. Whatever terms, these are terms I've heard people use in the area of divorce. Those are not legitimate options. Now you're saying, but wait, I'm divorced and I didn't do it. It wasn't, no, adultery wasn't involved. What does that mean? Well, that's what we're going to look at tomorrow in 1 Corinthians 7. So be encouraged, all right? Let's just have an honest conversation about what's taking place. And this is different than our normal daily dose, isn't it? But it's such a real deal. We have to spend some time covering all of that. All right, may the Lord bless you guys. Have a great day. And I will see you in the morning, Lord willing, and we're going to look at some really encouraging things about divorce and remarriage. Love you guys.